Stop running from the person who makes your jaw clench the moment they enter a room. That visceral disgust, that electric anger that floods your chest, it is not a warning to escape. It is the most accurate homing signal your psyche will ever send you. Every enemy you've ever obsessed over is a custom-designed mirror, and the reflection you hate most is the exact blueprint of the person you've secretly needed to become. If you close this video now, you will leave behind the only map that can lead you out of your own invisible prison. Stay with me. You didn't choose your enemies randomly. Your unconscious mind manufactured them with surgical precision to force an internal collision you've been avoiding for years. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is the cold architecture of the psyche. And once you see it, you will never look at a person who triggers you the same way again. Part 1. The signal beneath the hatred. Human beings walk around with an internal radar that never stops scanning. It isn't scanning for physical danger, not primarily. It is scanning for unexpressed parts of the self. And when it detects someone who carries a trait you have buried, rejected, or disowned, the alarm doesn't ring. It burns. It burns as irritation, judgment, contempt, or sometimes an almost magnetic hatred. You mistake that burn for a personality clash. The psyche is using that burn to point at missing territory inside you. Consider the colleague you can't stand because they're so ruthlessly ambitious. Every time they speak, you feel a wave of disgust. You call them arrogant, self-serving, fake. But ask yourself this: when did you strangle your own ambition? At what age did you decide that wanting success was shameful, selfish, or dangerous? That colleague didn't inject that trait into the room. You are hyper-attuned to it because you buried it alive inside yourself. The hatred is a distress signal from the part of you that is still hungry while you pretend to be full. This is the first phase of the enemy mirror. Recognition of the charge. The charge is always disproportionate. If a trait truly meant nothing to you, it would land with the emotional weight of a stranger's weather report. Indifference. But when it hooks you, when you replay conversations at 2 a.m., when your pulse changes at the sound of their name, your unconscious has already flagged that trait as a lost fragment of your own identity. You don't hate them for who they are, you hate the reminder of who you could become but have refused. The psyche doesn't speak in language. It speaks in emotional temperature. And the hottest temperatures are reserved for the truths we are most committed to avoiding. This is why your enemy list reads like a secret autobiography. The person you despise for being lazy might be a living accusation against your own exhausted, over-controlled life. The person you resent for their sexual freedom might be broadcasting a part of your own nature you condemned in early adolescence. The person you can't forgive for their vulnerability in public might be performing the very softness you were punished for showing. None of this is comfortable. But individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a complete human being, is not designed to be comfortable. It is designed to be thorough. And thoroughness demands that you reclaim the energies you have wasted in hatred and redirect them into integration. Part 2. The ego's hero-villain factory. Your ego is not a passive bystander in this process. It is a highly active narrative archetype. The moment the unconscious radar locks onto a trait you cannot accept in yourself, the ego writes a story, and the story always follows the same structure. You are the hero or the innocent, and the other person is the villain. This isn't a metaphor. The ego's primary survival function is to protect your self-concept from collapse. If it allowed you to see that the selfishness you despise in your partner is a direct reflection of your own suppressed needs, the entire identity you've built would tremble. So the ego spins a fiction. In this fiction, you are reasonable. You are justified. The enemy's trait is objectively bad, and your reaction is pure moral clarity. The fiction is so convincing that you never stop to examine it. The ego decorates the narrative with evidence, every memory of their wrongdoing, every slight, every tone of voice. It becomes a self-reinforcing loop, and while that loop is active, you cannot grow. You cannot grow because you have outsourced your own development to an external figure. As long as they are the problem, you never have to become the solution. This is why some people cycle through the same type of enemy again and again. A new job, a new relationship, a new city, and within months, the same figure appears wearing a different face. The names change, the bodies change, but the charge remains identical. That is not bad luck. That is an unintegrated pattern searching for a host. Your psyche will keep summoning mirrors until you finally agree to look. What makes the hero-villain script so dangerous is how much energy it consumes. Every hour spent resenting someone is an hour stolen from your own construction. While you're rehearsing arguments in the shower, the trait you need to develop is waiting in the dark, untended. While you're seeking validation for your victimhood, the strength you're projecting onto the enemy is gathering dust inside you. The ego's protection is actually a slow starvation of the self. Phase 3. The enemy ASA precise diagnostic tool. Here is where the architecture becomes practical. If you want to know exactly what you've repressed, stop analyzing yourself in isolation. That is nearly useless, because repression by definition hides what it buries. Instead, analyze the people who disturb you most. Take out a piece of paper, do this after the video, and list the 3 humans who generate the most consistent irritation, resentment, or rage in your current life. Not historical enemies, active ones. For each, write down the specific trait that hooks you. Not general complaints like they're annoying. Specific qualities: they dominate conversations, they take credit, they are emotionally needy, they are reckless with money, they are dramatically self-pitying. Precision reveals the map. Now, ask yourself the question the ego will fight hardest against. Where does this trait live inside me? Where have I disowned it, overcompensated against it, or secretly enacted it in a different costume? If you hate their dominance, when did you learn that your own voice was dangerous? If you hate their neediness, when did you decide your own needs made you weak? If you hate their chaos, what part of you is starving for unruliness? The answer will not come peacefully. There will be resistance, often immediate dismissal. I am nothing like them. That resistance is the signature of truth. The stronger the denial, the closer you are to a core repression. Your job is not to force yourself to become identical to your enemy. The task is to recognize that the trait exists on a spectrum, and you have amputated your access to it. Reclaiming it doesn't mean becoming domineering. It means retrieving your capacity to advocate for yourself. Reclaiming neediness doesn't mean collapsing into dependency. It means restoring the courage to ask for what you need without shame. The trait you hate is a deactivated power source. The enemy is simply holding it for you until you're ready. This diagnostic is ruthlessly accurate. It has been studied in depth psychology for over a century, and it operates independently of culture, gender, or era. Carl Jung called these encounters the projection of the shadow. The shadow is not a place of evil. It is simply everything you have been trained to hide. It's the anger you swallowed to be polite, the spontaneity you crushed to be disciplined, the arrogance you buried to be humble. And because the psyche seeks wholeness, not comfort, it will extrude that shadow content onto the external world until you bring it back inside. Every enemy is a return address. Part 4. Why avoidance collapses the system. Modern self-help often advises you to cut out toxic people, to protect your peace, to remove anything that disturbs your emotional state. That advice is half true and fully dangerous when applied without discernment. Yes, there are genuinely harmful individuals from whom you must distance yourself for safety. But the vast majority of your everyday enemies are not existential threats. They are psychological assignments. If you flee every time your nervous system gets activated, you train your psyche that growth is optional. The assignments pile up, and the same pattern simply reincarnates in the next partner, the next boss, the next neighbor. Avoidance is the primary reason people stagnate. The ego convinces you that peace means absence of disturbance. But psychological peace, the durable kind, is the result of integration, not insulation. You cannot become whole by removing every mirror. You can only become fragile. The person you avoid today because they trigger your insecurity is the person who, understood correctly, would teach you where your confidence was stolen. The conversation you dread is the classroom you need. Consider the physical immune system. It doesn't grow strong in a sterile bubble. It grows strong through exposure and adaptation. The psyche works identically. Your enemies are the adaptive challenges your psyche has chosen to force evolution. When you run, you remain weak in exactly the place you were meant to become unshakable. This is not an argument for tolerating abuse. It is an argument for accurate sorting. The coworker who inflates their achievements and makes you seethe, they are likely not a monster. They are a mirror for your own stifled self-promotion. The friend who constantly plays the victim, they are holding a reflection of your unacknowledged emotional fatigue. Sorting requires the question, is this person actively harming me? Or are they activating my shadow? In most cases, it is the shadow. And that activation, when met with consciousness instead of flight, becomes the raw material for a level of maturity you cannot reach any other way. Phase 5. The specific qualities that unlock the door. Let's move deeper into the mapping. The qualities you judge most harshly in others are the exact keys to your own locked potential, but only if you can invert the perception. Hatred of someone's laziness might be guarding your own repressed need for rest and recovery, a need you have labeled as weakness. The key is not to become lazy. The key is to permit yourself unstructured, guilt-free restoration without feeling like a failure. When you reclaim that, the hatred dissolves, because the other person is no longer performing a function you refuse to do for yourself. Hatred of someone's public confidence often masks a deep fear of visibility. You've been educated, perhaps through childhood experiences, that standing out invites attack. So you made yourself small, and now you loathe anyone who takes up space. The key isn't to become arrogant. The key is to reclaim your right to be seen without apology. The day you allow yourself to speak in a meeting without pre-apologizing, the charge against the arrogant person begins to fade. Hatred of someone's emotional expressiveness often signals that you were punished for tears or anger, and learn to associate emotional display with danger. You pathologize their vulnerability because your own was met with contempt. The locked room here holds your capacity for authentic intimacy. Until you unlock it, you will keep attracting and resenting emotionally expressive people, because they are living out the permission you have denied yourself. Every single trait that generates consistent hostility is a room inside you with the door bolted shut. The enemy is simply standing in front of that door, knocking, and your irritation is the sound of the knock. The question is whether you will open the door or keep soundproofing the wall until your psyche has to scream louder. through crisis, breakdown, or a repeating loop of conflict. Phase 6. Transmutation. From hostility to catalyst. This is the stage where intellectual understanding becomes structural change. Recognizing the mirror is the diagnosis. Transmutation is the surgery. It requires a specific practice, intentional encounter with the trigger, followed by immediate internal redirection. When you feel the surge of irritation toward someone, instead of feeding the mental courtroom where you prosecute their flaws, you pause and ask one silent question. What part of me needs this energy right now? You don't need to have the answer immediately. The asking itself reorients the nervous system from projection to reclamation. Imagine the hostility as a current of electricity. Projection wires that current outward to the other person, where it shocks nothing but your own peace. Transmutation rewires the current inward, where it powers a dormant part of your personality. The exact same voltage that was fueling resentment can fuel assertiveness, creativity, boundary setting, or self-compassion. The energy is never the problem. The direction is. Let's make this concrete. You're in a meeting, and a colleague interrupts you yet again. The familiar heat rises. The ego immediate narrates, disrespectful, narcissistic, always needs control. In that split second, you have a fork. Path 1 is the usual loop, stewing, venting later, constructing a case. Path 2 is transmutation. You notice the heat, you name it as a signal, and you silently ask, where have I not taken my own voice seriously? Then, in the next 30 seconds, you contribute a thought you would have edited out. You don't attack the interrupter. You simply reclaim your space. The energy has now served you. The person's behavior might not change, but your internal relationship to it transforms permanently. You are no longer a reactor. You are an alchemist. Transmutation is not a one-time event. It's a daily discipline. The first 10 times you try this, the ego will resist with every tool it has. It will whisper that you're letting them get away with it, that justice demands your anger, that to stop resenting is to be weak. These whispers are the ego's last stand. It knows that once you master transmutation, its primary defense mechanism collapses. Underneath that collapse is not chaos. It's an immense reservoir of available energy that has been tied up in imaginary battles for years. Phase 7. The Jungian arc. Enemies and individuation. Carl Jung gave this process its most precise name, individuation. It is the lifelong journey of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the self into a unified whole. The enemy, in this framework, is not an obstacle to individuation. The enemy is the mechanism of individuation. Without projection, you would have no way to identify what has been split off from awareness. The psyche, in its relentless drive toward wholeness, manufactures external friction precisely so you can recover internal wholeness. This is why the people who bother you most feel fated. They are. Jung insisted that we do not solve the shadow. We befriend it. Befriending means recognizing that the qualities you project onto enemies are not foreign invaders. They are exiled citizens of your own inner nation. The arrogant coworker isn't injecting arrogance into you. You are projecting your disowned authority outward, and then attacking it in effigy. The irresponsible family member isn't the sole source of chaos. They are reflecting the spontaneity you murdered in yourself to stay safe. This is difficult to hear if you have built a life around being the responsible one, the put-together one, the morally consistent one. But wholeness is not morality. Wholeness is integration, and integration includes the mess, the hunger, the aggression, and the unruliness that you thought you had successfully eradicated. You never eradicated them. You only rented them out to your enemies. The rent is due every day in the form of peace you cannot keep. Phase 8, the enemy timeline, past, present, and future. Your psyche's selection of enemies evolves with your developmental needs. The person who irritated you at 22 was perfectly designed for the task of your 20s, perhaps forcing you to confront dependence or fear of failure. The person who irritates you at 40 is calibrated for midlife integration, forcing you to confront unlived ambitions or denied mortality. The enemy is never static, because you are never static. This means you can map your own psychological growth by tracing the archetype of the adversary across your life. Think back. The bully in childhood wasn't just a random source of pain. They were an externalized version of your own undeveloped power. The parent you clashed with in adolescence was reflecting traits you needed to either integrate or consciously reject with clarity, not reactivity. The romantic partner who drove you to despair often embodied the exact emotional spectrum you had suppressed. If you look honestly at your history, you'll notice that the moments of greatest transformation were preceded by encounters with people you initially experienced as enemies. The hostility was the ignition. Now, look at your present. Who is activating you right now? That person is the current assignment. They are holding the curriculum for this season of your life. The lesson will not be how to get rid of them. The lesson will be, what do I need to reclaim so they no longer disturb my peace? And here's the critical insight. When you integrate what the mirror shows, one of two things happens. Either the person changes their behavior toward you because you are no longer projecting onto them, or they fade from your life entirely because the energetic cord has been dissolved. Either outcome is liberation. Phase 9, resistance, denial, and the second layer. Even with all this knowledge, the ego has a secondary defense. It will say, fine, I understand this intellectually, but my situation is different. This person is objectively toxic. This trait is genuinely bad, and I am right to hate it. This is the final gatekeeper. And here is the truth that shatters that defense. You can be factually correct about someone's behavior and still be using them as a projection screen. Both can be true simultaneously. The narcissist you dealt with may indeed have been damaging, and yet you may have stayed in that dynamic because their narcissism allowed you to avoid your own fear of visibility. You could blame them for keeping you small, instead of facing the part of you that was afraid to be big before you ever met them. The presence of real harm does not cancel the mirror. It deepens the complexity. The assignment becomes more nuanced. What need in me kept me tethered to this dynamic? And what quality do I now need to restore in myself so that I never enter it again? The enemy who wronged you might have handed you the exact boundary-setting muscle you were missing. Not as a gift they intended, but as a consequence you claimed. The transmutation of trauma into clarity is the highest form of this work. So when your mind screams, but they are actually terrible, don't stop the inquiry. Extend it. Ask, and what did my attraction to their drama, my inability to walk away, my compulsive need to fix or fight, reveal about my own missing architecture? The answer will be uncomfortable, and it will set you free in a way that merely demonizing them never will. Part 10. The Integration Practice. A 4-step protocol. You can't think your way into wholeness. You must practice your way there. I'll give you a precise, repeatable protocol. After this video, take the 3-person list you created and apply these 4 steps to each one. Do this in writing. The act of writing bypasses the ego's narrative loops and forces clarity. Step 1. Name the trait with surgical precision. Not they're annoying, but they frequently steer conversations back to themselves in a way that feels monopolizing. Precision is the antidote to projection. Step 2. Locate the seed of that trait in your own history. Find one memory where you acted, however subtly, in a similar manner, or where you wanted to but stopped yourself. Even if it's a distant echo, the goal is to prove to your psyche that the trait is not foreign. It's just disowned. Step 3. Ask what this trait in healthy expression could offer you. If the enemy is self-promotional, the healthy expression might be appropriate self-advocacy. If the enemy is messy, the healthy expression might be creative chaos. Write down the positive form. Step 4. Design a micro-action to express that positive form within the next 72 hours. One small, deliberate act. If you need to reclaim voice, speak an opinion you would usually suppress. If you need to reclaim rest, schedule a guilt-free hour of doing absolutely nothing. The action must be small enough to be achievable, yet direct enough to signal to the unconscious, I'm ready to bring this energy back. This protocol works because it shifts you from passive analysis to active reclamation. The enemy's hold over your internal state loosens immediately after the first completed cycle, not because they changed, but because you retrieved the part of yourself that was hostage. Phase 11. The societal mirror. Enemies at scale. This same architecture operates not only in personal life, but in collective psychology. The groups, ideologies, or public figures you hate with irrational intensity are mirrors for collective shadows. The political figure who enrages you likely personifies an archetype you have not integrated, perhaps the authoritarian you fear you could become, the irresponsible rebel whose freedom you envy, the privileged elite whose ease you secretly desire. The outrage that burns in public discourse is rarely about pure justice. It is often a massive, unprocessed shadow projection staged on a national scale. The same transmutation principle applies. Instead of draining your life force into endless outrage loops, ask, what quality has this collective enemy activated in me that I need to reclaim? If their arrogance infuriates you, where have you disowned your own authority? If their hypocrisy disgusts you, where have you been lying to yourself about your own inconsistencies? Society will not integrate its shadow until individuals do. And each of you who does this work removes one projection from the collective field. The peace you create internally radiates externally. This is not a call to political passivity. It is a call to psychological clarity. You can take action against injustice without being consumed by projection-driven hatred. In fact, your action will be more effective, more strategic, and less exhausting when it is sourced from integration rather than unexamined reaction. Phase 12. The withdrawal of projection and the strange peace when you begin reclaiming projections. A strange thing occurs. The people who once triggered you start to feel less relevant. Their behaviors that hooked you so viciously now land with a quiet thud instead of a detonation. You might even feel a strange gratitude, not for any harm they caused, but for the fact that they held your lost peace long enough for you to retrieve it. Some of those people, sensing the withdrawal of your projection, will instinctively change how they relate to you. Others will drift away entirely, as if the script that bound you has been deleted. This new space can be unsettling at first. The ego has been living on the drama for so long that it doesn't know how to exist without an enemy. You might feel restless, bored, even empty. That emptiness is not a warning, it's a clearing. It is the silence after a long war, and in that silence your genuine self begins to speak, not in reaction to anyone else, but in its own authentic frequency. This is the beginning of sovereignty. You will also notice that when a new potential enemy appears, you now have a choice. You can still feel the initial charge. That's biological, unavoidable. But you no longer identify with it. You observe the heat without grabbing it. And then you ask the question faster. What is this signaling? The gap between trigger and inquiry becomes smaller. Eventually, the process becomes instantaneous. You live with fewer enemies not because the world has become peaceful, but because you have become whole enough that few people need to carry your rejected parts. Phase 13. The enemy ASA, signature of destiny. Your biggest enemy is never an accident. It is a signature of your unrealized destiny. The person who most violently disrupts your peace is outlining the exact perimeter of your next expansion. Every trait you hate is a disowned ambition, a buried sensitivity, a stifled power. If you could map the sum total of your hostilities over the last decade, you would have a perfect negative image of your most authentic self. That negative image, once developed, becomes the positive path. This means the enemy you most want to destroy is, psychologically speaking, your most valuable asset. They are not placed in your life to punish you. They are placed by the architecture of your own psyche to wake you. The question is whether you will stay asleep, fighting phantoms, or wake up and reclaim the keys. The battlefield outside is always a misdirection. The only territory that matters is internal. Individuation is non-negotiable. Your psyche will keep sending teachers in enemy costumes until you graduate. There is no final graduation, only deeper layers, but each layer integrated returns more of your life force from exile. The energy you spent hating can become the energy you use to build. The mirror you wanted to shatter becomes the window you walk through, closing. So tonight, instead of rehearsing the argument again, sit in the dark and ask quietly, what part of myself have I put in this person's hands? Don't answer with your ego. Listen for the answer that comes from beneath the noise. It will sound like your own voice, younger, untouched by the story. That voice will tell you what you locked away and when you locked it. And in that moment, the enemy begins to dissolve, not because they were defeated, but because you no longer need them to carry your weight. That's not forgiveness. That's reclamation. And it is the most powerful move a human being can make. Thank you for staying until the end. If this perspective shifted something inside you, let the algorithm know, and more importantly, let your own psyche know by taking the